This is the case of a patient implanted with a dual-chamber ICD for ischemic cardiomyopathy in secondary prevention. He was hospitalized because he received an electrical shock during exercise. You can see on the plot here that two zones were programmed, a VT zone and a VF zone. This is an episode of VT. And we will focus on this tracing on how to program the first cardioversion shock in the VT zone. On the plot, you can see that initially there is a ventricular tachycardia with dissociation between the ventricles and the atria. You can see also the progressive aggressiveness of the therapies, the first burst, second burst, third burst, then a ramp, a second ramp, and a third ramp with every time an additional beat. All these ATP sequences are inefficient, so the next therapy is an electric shock, 10 joule shock. It is delivered, and you can see here the return to sinus rhythm. You can see on the EGM that it is a ventricular tachycardia with ventricles faster than the atria, and here you can see the first burst that is delivered, and all the ATP sequences will be non-efficient to reduce the arrhythmia. So after 3 bursts and 3 ramps, the next therapy is a cardioversion shock of 10 joules. So there is reconfirmation on the ventricular tachycardia. Then the charge of the capacitors is very short charge since the amplitude of the shock is limited. At the end of the charge, there is a confirmation. The shock cannot be delivered on this second cycle since there is a atrial signal and there is a protection against the induction of atrial fibrillation. So the shock is delivered on the third ventricular signal after the end of the charge. And you can see that the shock is efficient with a return to sinus rhythm. There are more or less two options to program the amplitude of the first cardioversion shock in the VT zone. The first one is, like in this example, to program a low amplitude shock like from 5 to 10 joule. The second option is to program a maximal output cardioversion to maximize the likelihood of success of a single shock. The advantages of programming a low amplitude first shock like in this example are first that these 10 joules are often efficient. In many episodes of VT, you do not need a maximal output cardioversion to reduce the arrhythmia. The second point is related to the consumption. Of course, with 10 joules you will decrease the consumption compared to a maximal output, and it may be important in terms of battery drain when the patient presents many episodes of VT requiring a shock. It is probably not determinant if there is only 1 or 2 episodes, but if, for example, the patient receives 10 to 20 shocks for VT, then it could be important in terms of consumption. Another point that may favor the delivery of 10 joule compares to a maximal output for the first cardioversion shock in the VT zone could be the shorter charge duration. But as you see here, I think that the charge duration is much less determinant in the VT zone than in the VF zone in terms of risk of syncope. Since, like in this example, the shock is being delivered after sometimes more than 1 minute, corresponding to the different ATP sequences. So the few seconds difference in the charge durations between a shock of 10 joule or maximum output in the VT zone are probably not determinant clinically. The last point that may favor the delivery of a 10 joule shocks as the first cardioversion shock in the VT zone is that the detrimental impact of the electrical shocks on the morbid mortality of implanted patients has been demonstrated. Therefore, it may be recommended to decrease the amplitude of the delivered therapies when possible.